Hello and welcome to a special Atlantic Council discussion. Today we're talking about the digital crossroads, world choices for 2021 and onwards. This is the intersection of massive changes when it comes to data, technology, and the choices that we need to make both here in the United States, but also globally, and where we want to go. We have a very august panel brought together today, and I'm excited to hear their views about where we need to be placing our bets, where we have opportunities of hope, and where we need to actually recognize more people-centered and human-centered approaches to the data and tech issues of 2021 and onwards. I'd like to first go to Terry Halvorsen. Terry, you have a very august background, having worked with the Department of Defense on challenging issues. Terry, I'd be interested in your thoughts about what we need to be thinking about as we look towards the future and addressing these challenging issues as how COVID-19 has changed data and tech. Terry, your thoughts?
Well, David, I think the first thing that it certainly has done is forced us to think a lot more about mobility. I think we were headed in that direction, but COVID has certainly forced us to really rethink how we are going to do more mobile working and frankly, more mobile socializing and just be more mobile in every aspect of our life, our work, business. And governments are now forced to have to interact more in a mobile manner, in a distant manner. So that's putting demands that we have not seen in the past on the internet. I mean, as we've gotten our advice today for our panel, turn everything off so we have enough internet to do this. I still get to see the global internet maps, and we're using the heck out of the internet worldwide. So I think we're really having to adapt to a new way of doing business that's forcing us to relook every way we do that. And that includes government policies, government rules, regulations. Same thing with business policies, how you workforce. On the other hand, it's also giving us some interesting freedom. COVID, terrible disaster, and the global impacts it's going to have are going to last for a long time. But it does, like many global disasters, do a couple things for us. One, it forces us and actually allows us to get out of the box. We're looking at the medical community today, and they're taking and doing things in search of a vaccine they would not be doing normally. Mm-hmm. So it does let us get out of the box. Governments and business are putting more resources into how to move forward. We've seen in the US stimulus packages, Europe stimulus packages, there is more acceptance of taking chances. So I think at the same time we're having this terrible pandemic, we also have an opportunity to move forward in technology to help battle the pandemic, but also to help battle unfortunately, the pandemics in the future, world disasters, whatever they may be. I mean, unfortunately, I think that's still in our future, that we're going to have both man-made and natural disasters, and we can learn a lot from this environment. And maybe the biggest tragedy of COVID would be we did not take some of the opportunity to work and learn and take the capabilities that are offered right now and move forward with them. Technology can play a big part in helping us get through COVID, and I think COVID is going to be, we use the term new normal a lot. I'm not quite sure what all of that means, but it do means we're going to have change. And I think we will not see the world go back to complete post-COVID behavior. I think industries are going to find out, people can work at home. And that works pretty well in some cases. It certainly saves industry money. I think governments are going to find that there's ways to do more services in a mobile manner. That's going to stay in place. And I think people are going to figure out there are different ways now to stay in contact. And I hope what happens there is that, today, I think we all see this, our lifestyle is very fast. We're moving all the time. It is hard to stay in touch maybe with some of the people you want to. I think today we're forcing ourselves to do that. Maybe that will remain from COVID, that we use all of these technologies to do that. So.
Very well said, and I really appreciate what you said, Terry, that this is a crisis, and at the same time, there are opportunities to seize on the things that we want to amplify as we go forward in terms of staying connected and identifying new ways of working. So thank you for that. Melissa, Mr. Flagg, also similar distinguished background. I know we've had a lot of conversations about how the world is changing as well. Could you share with us your thoughts about the new demands on businesses, government, and individuals as a result of the pandemic?
I mean, I think that one of the most interesting aspects for me is actually thinking about how we bring technology into the social space. It's all well and good to say businesses now know they can go remote, but we haven't been through cycles of how does the culture of a company change after a year of being remote? How do promotions get decided on when you have employees who've never met you in person competing with people that had a long-standing relationship with you prior to going remote? And that, I think, lays us into this conversation around inequality as well. And how do we actually ensure that in an environment where we are all now remote, but we have a very different kind of chosen individual interaction that's not visible by everyone else necessarily in the institution, how do we think about bias and equality both in the workplace, but also a technological equality outside of the workplace that ensures our pipelines don't become actually less diverse rather than more diverse, even if we put the work in. I'm in rural Missouri right now. My bandwidth is limited. I have real challenges with keeping the internet up and running. And it concerns me that I would say at least 30% of the state, there are some counties that have coverage of less than 3% on anything other than satellite. And that you can't sustain good sort of visual video connections on satellite in a reliable way. So the idea that businesses are going to be as pressured as governments, as federal government and state governments and local governments, to rethink how we bring access to broadband, how we bring connectivity to every household. And every household means you have to go into some really low density areas in rural America. And so again, I think this idea around inequality and diversity, it has so many new dimensions that are brought to the table when you start to bring, I think, this quote unquote new normal that has a lot more remote, has many more remote aspects to it. I also think that we can't necessarily rely on the federal government to be the source of all our solutions, the way we got maybe accustomed to doing in the 70s and 80s. We are going to have a significant economic impact from this crisis that will not go away overnight. I've heard lots of conversations that we're going to be back to where we were at the end of 2021. It took us 10 years to bring back jobs after 2009. And that was a financial crisis that didn't have the social aspects to it that this crisis has. We've changed our habits as humans. We've changed how we socialize, how we eat, how we shop. Those habits don't just get broken and reformed overnight. There will be an economic challenge, and the government has spent trillions, and their tax receipts are going to be lower, and so they are not going to have the same sort of financial resources at their disposal at the end of this. And so I think industry and philanthropy and academic endowments and private individuals are going to have a role to play. And I think that we really need to lean into that as individuals and as a community of actors, and think about how we come up with collective solutions to these problems so that technology really is the positive, is a positive part of this new future, rather than something that just drives us into a future that I think looks much less diverse and much more unequal if we're not careful.
Very well said, Melissa. And what I like that you underscored is we can be the change we want to see happen. So we are the Calvary. So Derry Goberdansingh, you have led some impressive efforts with the federal government involving data and AI. I know you're also working with state governments. What changes do you see in store and what seem to be happening as a result of the pandemic? But also, can you share a little bit, Derry, about your industry perspectives as well? What's changing in the business side as well, please?
Sure. I think I can start with the business side. I'm lucky. Unlike Melissa, they are being a little bit more remote. I am lucky in that I have full internet access. I can have satellites, cable, or any high-speed internet I would like. So from a business perspective, as a business owner, um, it works really well for me in that I have these facilities and I have the infrastructure available. For many businesses, that is not always the case. In fact, in many businesses outside of a small cluster in a wonderfully urbanized area, it presents a huge challenge. It presents a huge challenge in companies being able to capitalize on their technological advances and using video chat to keeping in contact with each other, setting up sharing spaces, and understanding the costs that are associated with that, because not all their employees are available to have that. Some employees may not have the full bandwidth access or have the computing resources available. So I think the mobile aspects and the continued mobile push is going to be there. Changing how and where we do work has been one of the massive changes that I've seen. In fact, my wife has contemplated us just moving to the beach for the foreseeable future and just sit there. And I said yes, but I don't have good internet. So, so that was actually the one of the big decision makers. I didn't have good internet there, so that affects where you go. Now, that being said, that's not an impossible conversation to have, because I know some others who are now have their mobile offices. Some folks have decided to give up their houses and they've always wanted to drive around the country and they have a mobile office, and we have conversations while they're in their Winnebago. They pull off a side and they have that wonderful satellite internet. Now they don't have video. So I think the question as to what is work, where is work, and how do you work is going to be critical to discuss. And I think the fact that the food industry has started to recognize those changes is a great thing. Understanding the leveraging of multiple sources of data by big organizations for food delivery is great. I think the food preparation, you still can't get away from that. There's no digitizing that, at least not just yet. So we are still bound by human factors, and that's a good thing. So we have to figure out how do we incorporate those folks into the solution and understand where the different pockets of technology can advance the conversation and where it's going to hurt us, and how do we bridge that divide. I think in the states, federal, local factoring, we are seeing that so in the federal government perspective, the response was fairly quick. I think several organizations started to anticipate. In fact, some of them had tests, disaster tests a week before many decisions were made. So it no longer became a test, it became a reality for them. And they had to start to shut down who had access to the remote resources. In fact, I lost access to remote resources as a contractor because they were prioritizing the federal civilians, and that's completely understandable. But as time goes on, you have to figure out how do you expand that to allow for those spaces to take place, to allow the flexibility in the workspace, so that those folks who are because we have to factor in reality, there are parents with children who are going to be staying at home because various counties have decided to either open schools or not open schools, or have a mixed bag. And as parents, you have a child, and you have a child. So you have to figure out how best to ensure that they get their education, their needs met while you're still working. And there may be some requirements that, you have meetings. So you have to figure out that balance. And I think governmental institutions are trying to figure out that appropriate balance. I think we were talking about Zoom rooms earlier. So how do you find that space where you can have that? But I think even more so breaking down what was normal. I think Terry brought that up, that earlier with regard to what we considered normal and what the workplaces consider that as normal. I think us sitting at different locations in your kitchen, I happen to have an office space, right? So in my basement. So this is where I do my work normally. However, that doesn't mean it's where I should always do my work, and nor is it where others are going to be doing their work. So we have to be accepting of the human nature into this, where it is okay to pause in the middle of a meeting and handle some other activities.
Very well said, Derry. And what I particularly liked is, like you pointed out, I mean, we've got to think about the second and order impacts in both where we work, how we do education. I mean, as Melissa and Terry were both underscoring as well, we're not going to go back to the way things were in 2019. And this very well may be a long drawn out pandemic. And I think you underscored that well. So now that we've heard our thoughts from the panelists on how data and tech is changing the world, I'd like to go to a special conversation with Dana Hudson. Dana Hudson has a lot of experience working on both sides of the aisle, trying to work with Congress to get things done. And I'm interested in Dana's thoughts in particular about what Congress needs to be thinking about and how we can engage Congress, not just with those that have the regular conversations from a policy side, but how as we as a country, we as members of the public, we as concerned neighbors and friends, what can we do to engage those leaders in Congress to try and make sure that 2021 is as positive and as beneficial for everyone? Dana, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that topic.
You know, the COVID packages that have been kind of a rapid fire response to the needs by our country right now have been, I think, helpful in a lot of ways. I think because they were also executed so quickly that there are a lot of places where the Congress can refocus and adapt and do maybe a little more thorough and thoughtful legislating in the next year. There's a lot of opportunity for that, given an election year that can also complicate things. But, you know, when we're looking at, you know, the sort of situation we're having with the health pandemic, coupled with the great power competition environment for our national security, I think there's a lot that the Congress can focus on that would be really addressing all of those situations at once. You know, focusing on empowering more manufacturing in the United States would be a really, really important place to go. There's a lot of legislation right now focused on limiting sourcing electronics and key components from China. And I know my friends, my clients in the sector are worried about what that means, because there simply are not in U.S. manufacturing for a lot of these components. So how do we open that up? I think certainly a focus on the academic space would be a great place to go, encouraging the path in that direction for manufacturing, so that we do have the sourcing available for these key components, so that U.S. Makers of, you know, innovators, people that are coming up with these emerging technologies that are serving both our communities here at home, our first responders, and our defense community, can really do the best they can with American-made products. But we've got to get back to a manufacturing base.
Thank you, Dana. And I really liked how you sort of outlined that maybe we can, now that we recognize that COVID-19 is not just a flash in the pan, that this is a long haul, we can actually be more strategic in 2021 in our thoughts. Given that you've had, you've worked on working with both sides of the aisle, you're trying to actually get people to get things done. Could you maybe share to us, you know, how can the public do more than possibly just write a letter to their congressperson? I mean, what can the public do to sort of feel more engaged in actually helping shape where the United States goes, but also where the world goes when it comes to thinking about data and technology and making sure it's a force for good?
Well, I think, you know, really number one is I would love for people to get less angry. Be passionate about your positions, but stop demonizing the other side. Stop demonizing someone you see as a deal maker. Statesmanship means you come to the middle and you find consensus, and that shouldn't be a bad thing. And I would love for Americans to really see that when their legislators, their representatives are making, reaching out across the aisle and finding a solution together, that tends to be where a lot of the great answers are. And I think just taking that visceral sense of anger out of our political space would be really, really helpful. From a tactical standpoint, I would say get to, you know, certainly send emails, send updates to your local, not just your federal legislators, but certainly your state representatives and senators are doing a lot at the state level to help your specific community. Same with your commissioners or your city council. Get to know those local leaders who can also be an advocate for you and your industry or whatever your cause may be, with those other folks in the higher up legislating space, you know, whether it's Washington or the state capitol. One of the biggest things I tell small businesses is to get out there and tell your legislators exactly what it is you're doing, what your capability is, are you fielded, where is it being utilized, where are the solutions being met? And because it's amazing how much they just don't know, and they don't know until you tell them. So it's our fault if we're not educating our policymakers to make better choices or make more forward-leaning choices to help emerging technologies on their path to move forward. I think that burden is on us. We've got to get in there. Don't be afraid to talk to your reps. Don't wait until there's a problem. Go in proactively. Let them know how many people you employ. Let them know what your capability provides our world, our community, or our country, whatever the case may be. And get in there and educate them early and often. That's absolutely the key.
Excellent. And I liked in particular, like you said, we have to recognize that anger, unfortunately, polarizes us and pulls us apart. We need to actually say, part of what makes, really statecraft work is actually when we come together and we figure out ways to work together, as opposed to trying to do winner take all. And I think that divides us if we try to do that. So with that said, as one closing thought for you, Dana, what gives you hope for 2021? I mean, what helps you sort of say that we can actually come together as a country, both in the United States, but also come together as a world and recognize that open and free societies can work together across the planet to make sure that the future is beneficial for as many people as possible? What gives you hope?
I think the fact that there's been a lot of compassion shown across our communities, given the pandemic crisis situation. I think people can come together in a situation like this that we've been experiencing the last few months. There's a bit more compassion, basically for your neighbor. We're spending more time at home, so maybe we're getting to know our neighbors a little more than we used to. Spending more time with your families or just your small community in your area, your neighborhood. So I think that getting to know people and becoming basically more aware of their plight as well can tend to make us all a little bit more compassionate. And I think that the focus on really boosting our economy from the congressional space is also a good thing. It's also helping people come together. There's a lot of rapid fire legislating right now and lobbying. So I think the more we can share, the more we get to understand each other. And I think that is a really great place to begin. We certainly need to, I think, love each other more than, I go back to the anger, which doesn't solve problems. So I think if we can reach out, try to understand where your neighbor's coming from. We don't have to alienate people or unfriend them just because they have a different point of view. So I think that the crisis has actually enabled people to kind of do some introspection, both of their own personal self, their families, and their businesses. So that's a good thing, and that does give me a lot of positive energy for the future.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Dana. I hope whatever happens in 2021, they're listening to your words. I'm reminded of what you said about making sure we strive to do understanding. As Lincoln said, I do not like that person. I must get to know them better. Hopefully, more people can follow your example. So thank you, Dana, for all you do as a positive change agent.
Thanks for having me, David. It's great to see you.
If you were to make recommendations to whomever is in office in 2021, in the presidency and in the Congress, if you could give us high level, we don't have to dive down to the executive, long depths of the policies, but high level, how can we actually grapple with the fact that we may need new infrastructure? And I think we touched a little bit about internet. So internet is a given. Assume that's addressed. But how do we deal with the fact that there's just large amounts of data now? People talk about AI, but they often don't talk about the data side of AI. Like, how are we going to grapple with the fact that we are probably already drowning in data, and 2021 is only going to be that plus more for the future? So, Derry, interested in your thoughts as to what you would recommend.
So, assuming we've solved the internet issue here, I guess, and I think there's conversation about making it a public utility or of sorts. Whether that's the case or however it eventually comes out, I think there's a public-private partnership that is required here, incentives from multiple parts to be able to pull this off. In terms of the data itself, we are exponentially increasing the amounts of data that we have and where we store it, how we store it, and the energy requirements that are going with that. But more importantly, it's the policies of how do we even manage and wrangle through that buckets of data to make decisions. I think we're going to get more data than we can ever use, and some of that data is never going to ever be utilized in a manner that is useful for us, unfortunately, because there's just so much of it. So I think it's the part of that educational experience that has to come in place as we start to look at what is the new normal, right? As we move past this current phase and let's go post-COVID. We have a new normal that we've established. We will have a workforce that's coming in, who's, let's say they're 18 years old, they just graduated high school and they jump into the workforce, or let's say 21, 22, and they finish college with their higher ed degrees. What are they going to do now? You know, where are they and what should they focus on? And that policy of being able to give them the right set of education to handle that data, it's no longer, oh, well, it's an IT problem. It's not an IT problem. It's an everybody problem. We all need to be able to understand how to manage and wrangle through that data. Forget the data storage issue, because I think we have technology to handle storage, right? It's the policies by which we can share and open up access to that data and leveraging it across multiple sections. And that's going to require a little bit of policy changes to being able to access that while being good stewards of data so that we don't do things in the wrong way. Meaning we should not federalize every piece of data and then therefore we have one central source of truth, right? It should be democratized the way it currently is, but allowing more freeness to be able to share that data.
Nicely said, and thank you, Derry, because you did underscore that assuming we can solve the internet issue, there's still the questions about how do we make sense of the data and how do we deal with, as you said, the exponential increasing amount of data. Terry, I'd like to turn to you. Obviously, you had to grapple with this in some respects ahead of everybody else, being DoD, Department of Defense CIO. But what would be your recommendations if you were to make suggestions as to what we should think about in terms of infrastructure and policy to deal with the data volume that we're facing?
David, so I'm not going to take a pass on the internet. I think we've got to talk
Sure.
about it. Melissa brought up an interesting point. We do have both some rural and some actually urban areas that are very underserved by internet. Our current internet structure, even in great areas, really is not up to handling the amount of data. We saw that in DoD. The amount of data we're generating is fantastic. We have thrown Moore's law out the window. I don't know what law we're working on now. So we're going to need a national plan for handling internet, and I think a national plan for how we address and accelerate, I'm going to say 5G and the 5G network system. But we're going to talk a little later, I think, about the set of technologies that we will have to build to make this all work. But I think the first thing we've got to do is we really do have to have a national strategy about 5G. And this strategy has got to be an industry, government industry, whichever one you want to say first strategy. It's not going to work with just the federal government, and it's not going to work just with industry trying to tackle this. The good news, I think, for us is that in the last, I'm going to say 15 years, and certainly in the last 5, I think we've seen a better cooperation between industry and government in trying to work and solve some of these problems. Once we get the internet problem solved, a couple things are still going to be true, and they're actually going to be worse. Privacy of data and data security is getting worse under COVID. More and more people on the internet. You've got a lot of users who are not sophisticated, and the forces of evil are taking advantage of that. The bad guys are out there, and they're doing that more and more. So we're also going to need to think and put some policies in place that force the government and force industry, I think, to be a little more careful in how we build the next set of infrastructure. And we've got to also keep that affordable. I did like Melissa's point that we can't afford as a nation to leave any part of the nation behind as we build this new infrastructure. Everybody's got to be able to play, and that's kind of a good thing to do. But in my mind, it is more than a good thing to do. It's going to be what we have to do if we want this nation and all our allies to move forward and still be able to do the things that we want to do. So we've got to build that infrastructure. We've got to secure the infrastructure better. We're going to need policies that do that, working industry and government. And we're going to need to think about what does this change in some of the, Melissa nailed this one too, some of the social dynamics and some of the rules that we have today that govern social behavior. An example, my son was just going through a refi, as many people are right now. And some of the companies still don't accept electronic signature.
Oh, no.
You just think about that for a minute in today's environment, and that is going to cause a problem. And Jerry brought up another thing. What about those industries that still have to be in the physical space?
Right.
How do we help them with technology and things like social distancing for medical reasons? Even when we get a vaccine, everybody's predicted this is still going to be a fairly long time to get the vaccine out. And unfortunately, if you read a lot about this, COVID-20 is probably right behind COVID-19.
Right, right.
And everything we're doing as we have moved around the world has generated more opportunities for these type of diseases. We've got other natural disasters focused. So this is not a one-time problem for us. So we are really going to have to think about how do we make it so that we can be in the mobile world, protect those things that have to be physical, and protect the people that still have to do physical work, and still interact with people. And that's going to take policies in every potential area. A big topic today, law enforcement policy. We're going to have to change that. Medical policies, they're going to have to change. Dealing in business. So this is the only thing I can think of that really has impacted the world before like that. It's another tragedy, is war.
Right.
You look at what happened at the end of the Second World War. We had everything change from social norms to the way we did technology. The economy went up and down. We're going to be faced with that in the same, if not even a greater level than coming out of this, because this is impacting, everybody everywhere. And I think that's the other thing that this is going to take. We've talked a lot about national policy, and I'm on the phone most mornings with Europe, and I know they're all looking at national policy. The other thing we're going to have to start looking at now in this new world is some coordinated international policy, and that may be the hardest thing. And I'm glad that you're going to have some sessions later about what we're going to do internationally. We better be having a lot of those.
Well, I appreciate it, Terry. You set it up well for us as to why the Atlantic Council matters here in 2020. That 59 years later, if anything, if we don't do the global part, it's the hard part that needs to be done. So
we will fail without it.
And I really also like what you said, Terry, which is we can't take for granted that the internet's going to be solved, because it is hard problems. But I think what you outlined about thinking about how we make it available, how we make sure it's secure, and how we address the privacy is vital for where we need to go. So Melissa, assuming that fortunately in 2021 people listen to Derry's advice on the data side and Terry's advice on the internet side, your pick as to what would be the other big issue that would need to be addressed involving data and tech in 2021.
I think that we have to be very targeted in what we think about investing for new things that help us do these things better, right? So we sort of like the idea of homomorphic encryption, where you can do sort of manipulation on the data while it's encrypted, but it makes a lot of law enforcement people uncomfortable. All this freedom to encrypt and all of this. But as we move into a period where we're more and more remote, and we have to change our thinking about security, and we have to allow more work that we would traditionally isolate to be kind of out there on the interwebs, I think we have to get serious about aggressive investments in the types of technologies that support democratic values, right? Not just federalizing everything, but actually empowering individuals to use data and empowering the government to allow data to exist in large sort of clouds. I think we also have to get past this obsession that it's either the federal government or a university professor, and that's innovation. And then we'll give you a cyber loan if you're a company. We need national clouds that actually bring compute to entrepreneurs. It's all well and good to have the data, but if you're on a satellite connection in your Winnebago, it's hard to do serious analysis on large data sets, right? And it can take a very long time in the cloud, and that can get very expensive. So what about these ideas that actually support economic engagement by a much broader sort of set of communities that didn't need to be virtual before? If we really want to bring more communities that are not traditionally tech savvy into this space, we have to give them the resources they need. We have to empower them with secure ways. We have to do the actual analysis. We have to empower them with lower power compute that allows them to do these types of analyses in more affordable ways. We have to get past allowing the large tech companies that have endless money to dump into power and compute to define the best ways to do AI and data analysis. And we have to get serious about empowering more things that are like compute at the edge, that require lower bandwidth, that allow us to think differently about our data resources. So I think this is an incredible opportunity. While I have real concerns about sort of really bringing people in and giving people access, I think there's an incredible opportunity to think about empowering a whole set of new economic avenues for the small business person. I also think that if we have a generation of people who are pausing in their educations, if they're not being allowed to start university, if universities are closing, their education's getting disrupted, if they've gone completely online, we need to start thinking about maybe we bring these kids into a sort of civil service of a year or two, where we empower them to go out, learn technical skills, and go to things like education, food service. Think about medicine, think about all of these underserved areas that we want to move into the virtual. Let's get kids skill in coding, let's get them skills in data analysis, let's get them access to data, and then let's get them out there for a year creating new ways to support these sectors that are not traditionally full of techies. And then they get back into their education, they're going to be entrepreneurs. They're going to have this subject matter expertise that is so critical to link with technical skills. And if you really want national security across the board, and not just in the federal government and the DoD and Homeland Security, then empower these kids to think that way about how do you bring education and national security together. You tell us, and we'll have seed funds for small businesses. We have to look at this as an opportunity, but not just for large monopolies to occur who can afford it. And all of us go along like lemmings behind them, that they said this is the only way to do AI is deep learning. And they said this is the only way to do it is big compute. We have free will. We can choose different paths, and we can choose to fund the things that these other actors won't fund instead of trying to chase the shiny object on the heels of industry. Let industry do what they're good at, and let states and local governments and philanthropies and academic endowments help the federal government. Stop saying government when all you mean is federal. There are a lot of other actors in the system who want this nation to be strong, and we need to embrace them.
Very well said, and I like how you underscored that it's all of us, and again, that we all need to do this. So recognizing that we've been talking a lot about what the United States should do, I think it's important to recognize that we need to have a global perspective. And to that end, we'd actually like to hear some thoughts from Casey Choi, Executive Vice President and General Manager of the Global Mobile B2B team at Samsung, to help share an international perspective about what we should be thinking about for the choices involving data, technology, and the future ahead for us all.
Good morning. I'm Casey Choi. I lead Samsung's mobile enterprise business team in Seoul, South Korea. I want to thank our partners at the Atlantic Council for allowing us to power their convention coverage with some of the latest Samsung mobile and video display technologies. These are incredibly challenging times, full of uncertainty and disruption to our daily lives. No one likes the unknown, and that seems to be where we are today. But I can't think of a better time than our shared moment now to look ahead. We know we'll work our way through this. So while we do that, we also have to ask ourselves, what are the opportunities ahead of us, and what do we need to do to get there? How can innovation and technology help us not only reach the next normal, but make the journey there more connected with our loved ones while protecting their well-being and our own safety? Through richer experiences, not replaced by technology, but enhanced by it. Nothing will ever substitute the real-life moments we all hold dear. But now, more than ever before, meaningful innovation will be crucial. My path to this point in my life was like that of many American immigrants. I came to the U.S. as a young boy from South Korea, my family looking towards a better future. I grew up like all the other kids around me, played sports, went to school, and was proudly naturalized as a U.S. citizen. I went to my high school prom, raised a family, and made California my home for almost 50 years. I still call it home. I spent 35 years working at several of America's most iconic technology companies, IBM, NCR, HP, and Dell. I love the jobs I've had and what these great American companies stand for. 10 months ago, I made a momentous choice to come full circle, returning to Korea to take up the role of leading Samsung Mobile's global B2B teams. It was a great chance for me. Come back to the country of my birth and work for not only Korea's iconic and premier company, but also one of the world's largest and most innovative technology firms. My family and I were thrilled and humbled by the opportunity. I had never imagined in all my years that I would go back to the country that I left almost 50 years ago. But what a chance of a lifetime. As someone who's lived his life in technology, I knew very well about the amazing innovation that Samsung was doing. So for me, it was an exciting challenge, especially at this stage in my career. Or so I thought. Less than a month on the job, I had one of those, what have I got myself into moments. Have you ever had one of those? Because when news of COVID-19 started to break, Korea was right next to the epicenter. In fact, we were the second hardest country impacted, with fast rising cases and tragically deaths. At that point, everyone was trying to figure out what was happening and why. What do we need to do? Should my family and I stay in Korea or head back to the US? All of this against the backdrop of a new job, a new culture, new responsibilities. When I realized that normal was somewhere in the rearview mirror, I had to ask myself, did I make a mistake in coming here? And the answer, of course, now is no way. I have learned so much through my experience of being here, not just about Korea, but also about myself, my industry, and the positive impact that technology can have in the times that we are all going through. I don't want to dwell too much on Korea's successes in taming COVID-19 because the story has been well told already. But what I have seen is an inspirational story about what can happen when people come together and bring both technology and best practices to bear on our most pressing issues. As an executive working in high tech all my life, I've been so very impressed by the tremendous role that technology has played here in the response to the crisis. I evangelize tech every day. It's my job. But this is a great story about how technology can be a binding and healing force, not just in bringing people together, but keeping people together, helping us to stay on our chosen paths of learning, and even to help us get back to work safely. By now, you've all seen the images of Koreans driving up to COVID-19 test sites. The idea started in a small city north of Seoul called Goyang. When city officials devised the plan there, it only took 15 minutes and no direct contact. The idea quickly spread around the country and around the world. What you might not have seen is how Korea is using smart city databases, data mining, and artificial intelligence to track COVID-19 after the tests are done. The infrastructure was originally set up to help city managers monitor traffic and pollution across cities, but it's been repurposed quickly for public safety and awareness. So when testing identifies someone who has COVID-19, we can track where they've been, It takes about 10 minutes to do, and that information is posted on a website for the relevant area, followed by a text message to all the people who are in the proximity. No personal information is released, but people who are potentially at risk can get the information they need, and they can ask themselves, do I need to get tested? Do I have to take special precautions? It also helps officials quickly identify hotspots. This isn't just contact tracing, it's next level contact tracing. But like everywhere, Korea still depends on people to do the right things for themselves and for others. Korea has never actually shut down, but we can guide people in the right direction. Citizens and visitors in Korea regularly get text messages encouraging people to wear masks, wash hands, socially distance. We're also seeing smart tablets being used for temperature checks before entering buildings. Just walk up to the tablet and it takes a reading. It's a great example of how technology can help us maintain social distancing. So I went from the excitement of returning to my birthplace, from what have I gotten myself into, to true admiration for what can be accomplished even in a really short period of time. It's been impressive to see people come together and rally around the common threat, and to see the part that technology can play in keeping a country and its people up and running. Now, some of this technology has become part of our everyday discussions. AI, 5G, big data, social media. This was the opportunity to see them in action in meaningful ways and use cases, and at a critical moment in our history. It's also a chance to pause, think, and ask some questions about those technologies, because people do have questions. We hear about the benefits of 5G technology, but how will it affect my privacy? Is it secure? What's the role of artificial intelligence in the workplace, and what will it mean for my job? These are important questions, and for me, I think part of the answer is rooted in trust. I work on the enterprise side of the business, but the heart of Samsung is about people, our customers. And when we think about the role that technology plays in people's everyday lives, we think about connection, enjoyment, great experiences and joy. None of this happens without trust. Over the years, as Samsung has grown as a global consumer electronics brand used by hundreds of millions of people around the world, we've come to realize that something very special has happened. People didn't just choose to buy our products. You brought us into your homes and allowed us to be part of your daily lives. From the moment you wake up to the time you go to bed, it's hard to imagine something from Samsung not being a part of your life. For some people, it's the phone alarm that gets them going in the morning, or the smartwatch that helps them get a sound night's sleep. For others, it's the appliances they use to prepare breakfast for their children. Some of those appliances have become smart and are now the hub for the family, even suggesting meals to prepare or diets to be adhered to. It might be cooling your home in the middle of a hot day, or creating and sharing great moments with our advanced camera technology. It might just be the simple pleasure of gathering the family to enjoy some big screen entertainment or binge watching the latest Netflix series. Samsung is a Korean company, but we are a global citizen with employees around the world, including offices, research facilities, and sales operations across the United States. We are invested in the U.S. communities, and we feel privileged to be a part of the social fabric. The trust Americans have placed in Samsung is precious, and we will continue to strive to earn that trust in all we do. Even with all the technology and innovation I've experienced at Samsung and in my career, I also believe that we need to recognize that technology has its limits. Social behaviors and attitudes and how we interact with our technology are equally important. If we get that formula right, we can thrive. In other words, technology can help us get back to the work safely. It can help us enable remote health care and keep us together virtually. All of these are positive outcomes, but we need the human connection for the full effect. Technology alone cannot solve a problem. It's what you do with it and how society adapts that helps the technology to become a multiplying force. And that's an area where Samsung strives to do our part and lead the way. Innovation is hardwired into our DNA, but we've discovered that innovation for innovation's sake can sometimes neglect the soft, connective tissue that keeps us all together. Technology has to be meaningful. When it's playing its valuable role to make life better, connect us together, bring us joy, that's when the true power of the innovation shines through. With the pandemic, we're facing some of the biggest questions in a generation. How can we bring people together again safely? How can we get people back to work and help businesses, big and small, thrive? How can we get students the education they need while also giving them the socialization they need to learn and grow in a healthy way? How can we take care of our elders? We know that technology can play a role in the answers, but the answers are complex. We have to remember that it's people who come first. We also have to keep our eye on the future and think not about what comes next, but how can the next be better? Because it's not just about connecting people, it's making sure we connect better. And about making those connections and experiences more human. How can we help you stay healthy, for instance, not just from disease, but how can we empower you to take control and proactively manage your health and fitness? How can we use the power and promise of 5G to enhance our experiences, making them more real-time, with greater fidelity, and closer to reality than before? At the beginning of this year, I don't think anyone could have imagined the language that has become part of our modern lexicon. Who would have thought the new normal would be terms like social distancing, contact tracing, and N95? Or that words like Zoom and lockdown would have entirely new meanings, and new words would be created weekly like Blur's Day. So much change has happened, and I think we know we're in this for the long haul. And a relevant question for the technology around us is, how do we get it ready for the next normal? How can we get the most out of the power and capabilities that sits in the palm of our hand? Being Samsung, we believe that mobile technology is at the heart of the answer. One example that has undergone a sea change is work from home. 50% of employees already use a remote work option for some part of their work. In Asia, more than 30% of workers are using 3 different locations per day for remote work. So we've been working hard to get people get more out of their smartphones, empowering them to create mobile workspaces wherever they go, so they can maintain and even boost productivity and communications. We work on solutions to connect our mobile devices to smart TVs at home, giving families the extra screen real estate they need as they increasingly use their homes for offices, classrooms, gyms, and sanctuaries. But work solutions can't all be remote. How can we get people back safely while giving them peace of mind? In the US, we work closely with Ford Motor Company on a solution to provide social distancing notifications using our Galaxy smartwatch and Bluetooth technology. But what's most important is that it's about promoting new behaviors. It's only natural for workers and staff who haven't seen each other for weeks to want to shake hands or give a high five. But we can't do that anymore. These are behaviors we have to relearn. So the wearables not only give them a buzz when they get too close, they remind them not to gather in groups. They can even give a reminder to wash their hands. And if something does go wrong, give the ability to anonymously track who might need to be contacted and notified. Another example of how mobile technology has made a difference is in healthcare. We all knew that virtual healthcare was coming, but COVID-19 has significantly accelerated it. Inside the hospital, with the right mobile equipment, nurses and doctors can do their rounds remotely. This limits face-to-face contact and keeps everyone safer, while also keeping families at home up to date on their relative status using telehealth solutions. Patients can get better access to their doctors and care providers while minimizing the risks. Outside the hospital, wearable technologies are helping to measure and track vital signs, stress levels, blood oxygen levels, ECG information, and as a recently approved here in Korea by the Korean FDA, blood pressure. This helps those among us who are particularly vulnerable to have more control over their health and fitness conditions. We've come a long way from the "help, I've fallen and I can't get up" days. One group of workers deserves a special mention and our debt of gratitude. These are frontline workers, our health professionals, first responders, military personnel, grocers, delivery staff, retail staff, and those for whom working from home is just not an option. Thank you. Our rugged devices and solutions are helping to keep them safe and productive too. They're easy to clean and sanitize. They work with gloves on so our healthcare workers can focus on getting their work done. Out in the field, they are built to withstand all kinds of punishing conditions while keeping the team together through capabilities like one-button push-to-talk. We can also converge a range of technologies into one tablet: contactless point of sale, walkie-talkie, remote barcode scanning. That gives our frontline workers the ability to manage critical tasks and get more done. At Samsung, we see our innovation and solutions as a very important part of how we get ready for our next normal. But we never forget the human element. We should embrace the next normal as part of what we do, not as a replacement for what we had. These technologies should serve as our bridge to the future, helping us create something new rather than replace something that we've lost. This is the role that technology can play, and it's what we strive to achieve at Samsung, making technology accessible, more connected, and democratized so everyone can enjoy the benefits, helping us to solve our most immediate and pressing crises, while at the same time making sure that we don't lose sight of our human connections as we look to the future ahead. On behalf of Samsung Electronics, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of the Democratic National Convention proceedings. I wish the best of health and happiness for you and those closest to you. Thank you.
Melissa, I'd like to ask you first this question of, you talked about the things that we need to do to make sure it's all of us and how do we address it. And there's obviously a lot of overlapping technical, business and national incentive and needs there. Maybe if I could actually focus a little bit even more, historically, quite frankly, it's kind of like tech policy has been kind of the geeks in the basement, that's relegated to either OSTP, Office of Science Technology Policy, or maybe NIST or something like that. It's just like how it's the IT shop, it's the geeks in the basement that keep the thing running. But if what we're talking about is a world in which it can't just be delegated to OSTP and the geeks in the basement, how do you address this? I mean, policymakers, we've seen how well it's working for Congress for the most part in terms of being tech savvy. How do we address this? What would you recommend, Melissa, to make it so that it's all of us and not just that few that understand the technology?
So, personally, I have visions of a matrix, right? Where we know the inputs to technology, because I am one of the geeks in the basement. I like to fancy myself a translator, but we need funding, we need infrastructure, we need human capital, we need the right regulatory and policy environments. And then we have the actors that are critical. We need federal government, we need state and local, we need philanthropy, we need, not to be a broken record, we need academic endowments, we need international partners. This is not a complete matrix, but it allows you to start to think, if I don't see myself in this, I can add a column, I can add a row, and I can begin to look across it and say, what box can I work on? So I don't have to solve the whole problem. I can be empowered to work in my box, but I can also understand that there are going to be opportunities and conflicts that occur across this matrix as well. And I can plan how I think about engaging in that context. So personally, I get really excited when I think about things like the opportunity of proposal marketplaces that the federal government doesn't run. The idea that maybe we could help fund a public-private partnership or a nonprofit to actually allow entrepreneurs, researchers, whoever you are with an idea, to come in and say, I want to be able to do this. This is my methodology. This is what it costs. And if I'm a state innovation fund, or I'm a small philanthropy in, New Mexico, or I'm a large academic institution in Massachusetts, or I'm a religious philanthropy in Utah, I can look for the things that matter to me And a person can come in with one proposal and have access to a tremendous number of resources. And oh, by the way, we, as people who care about the whole matrix, can start to see this incredible wealth of ideas across the nation. And then the second aspect of this is the federal government has become really parochial about controlling who gets to ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
We're happy to allow lots of people to have money to work on their question, but they seem a little less comfortable with allowing lots of people in the matrix to actually lean in and ask their own questions. I think that we need to create programs that actually allow states and regions to get together with companies and philanthropies in their area and think about the problems that matter most to them, and then get matching funds from the federal government into land grant universities and other institutions to help create talent working on local problems, solving local problems, and creating jobs to stay near their families and in their communities, and building that sort of economic health across the country and that kind of pride in your community, in being able to live a life that is in service to your local community. I think this idea of reinstilling a belief and a trust in service really comes from feeling like you're solving problems and you're serving the people who've served you. And so I think there's this incredible opportunity to actually lean into that. That maybe we're missing, but that COVID actually highlighted for me. States came together, they figured out solutions, states worked with their universities to come up with how to solve their problems on time. Could it have been more strategic? Could it have been smoother? Sure, hindsight's 2020. But at the end of the day, if you stop obsessing over the things you wish had been done differently and you start actually beginning to look for the shiny lights, right? And start to learn from those, there are opportunities here to build on some things, some lessons that we've learned.
And I like particularly what you said about that, Melissa. You talked earlier about this idea that maybe we need to have a year of service for those that are not able to go to college. So maybe we create the Creative Problem Solvers Brigade or something measured up, modeled after the Civilian Conservation Corps or something like that, that we could actually have it be problem solvers, come one, come all, and help solve problems at the local level, state level, or national level for all of us. So thank you for that, Melissa. I'm going to segue next to Derry. Derry, I know you're working both with your own business, but you're also working with startups. So maybe from your perspective, how do we make sense of all these different overlapping needs, and what would you recommend as an entrepreneur yourself?
Sure. I think first back to the statement about privacy and security with all these new users coming on. One of the things that with the massive innovations that's taken place, we need to have as part of that an educational campaign to help instill in the minds of those who are using the internet the dangers of using the internet. I think the days of past when you first started getting on the internet and understanding don't talk to strangers, you should never talk to strangers. Well, clearly we stopped doing that, or else we wouldn't have an internet. But what
you mean, the people on Reddit aren't all the people that I know? There's other people on there.
But that's a good point, though. We're in that recognizing the security, recognizing the privacy of your data, and recognizing what you have, and being able to not just say, well, it's okay. I'm okay with giving away all of my information. I'm okay with just going ahead and handing my and to that question, I asked someone, so in that same vein, so what you're saying is you're okay with handing someone your banking account information and letting them go ahead and take that and walk away with that and being able to extract all your funds. He said, well, no, I'm not. I said, but you are if you said that you're going to be okay with giving up all your information. So I think part of that is an educational campaign, and kind of piggybacking on that statement about education and startups. I'm involved in a startup, and one of the things that we are trying to push here is the educational part of the jobs, and being able to tie that back in. There was a statement earlier about the various acts that are being passed by Congress and have been passed. So states have some fundings. There are public entities and private entities that have funding and grants that allow for these training, reskilling, upskilling of the workforce, and ensuring that they have the right types of skills that are needed for this particular age as we start to move into this new transformation. And being able to connect those folks with those jobs, being able to connect those not just with the jobs, but also to those opportunities to learn. It's not that the opportunities to learn aren't there, it's that people don't know where to look. I think when you have so much across the federal landscape, across the state and local landscapes, it's unfathomable where to even begin to start. I didn't realize this, that the state of Maryland has several grants available and you can easily apply for them. Well, easy is a relative term, but you have the ability to apply for grants. As long as you know where to look, as long as you know how to get there. Same thing with the local counties that are around. So being able to tie into those from a business perspective, because there are businesses that are looking to improve upon themselves and being able to tie that in. So it's being able to connect and form that connection so that you have the ability to expand those resources that are available to you. And I think back to what Terry had said, we can't overlook the fact that there is a disconnect in the communities that are existing. And so being able to tap, this is where this is where both the local and the federal and state have to come together to figure out the right set of incentives to increase that resilient infrastructure. Because if we look at more beyond just the pandemic perspective, we can't ignore the natural disasters that occur. So how do we allow communities to recover from said natural disasters? Being able to provide information where to go and how to rebuild, right? And I think that should not be lost on us. So getting these small businesses and startups, like the one that I'm working with, to be able to connect these communities together, connect these individuals to businesses and to this educational pieces that are necessary is very critical for one of the things that we'll need to help us not just get past this, but continue to evolve to the next phase of whatever our work-life balance will be.
Very well said, and that builds on what you said there. It builds on what Terry was talking about, how this is sort of like akin to war and the fact that we needed to help rebuild the world after World War II. There is going to need to be very intentional about rebuilding whatever the post-COVID world is to make sure it benefits as many people as possible. So Terry, you obviously have a lot of expertise when it comes with navigating overlapping technical with business, with national priority needs. And we talked a little bit about 5G and what was needed there in the technologies, but I'd be interested in your perspective. How do we navigate this in 2021? What would be the ways that you would recommend we go about doing this?
I think a couple things. One is we tend to throw technology into every policy discussion, and sometimes it doesn't need to be there. I would say often more often. That first part of that discussion we have on policy, we really do need to focus on outcome. Let's focus on the outcome of what we want from the policy, and then we can have all the geeks in the basement help us figure out how we'll get there. I also think, and I loved Derry's comment, it's time for us to do. I'm probably the oldest one on this panel today, and I can remember early in elementary school going through the national safety program on seatbelts. You may not, they had it in school. We actually had little seatbelts on our desk chairs. I don't think we need to go quite there, but it's time for a national safety program on how do you behave on the internet? How do you behave in a connected environment? And unlike in the past, where we may be focused on just kids, we've got to focus on what is, the fastest maybe growing part of our population, which I'm happy it is, and it's the older population.
Right.
But we've got to reach out to that. And I think that's part of what we have to have a bit of a policy on. How do we get people to work on this? And I think Melissa raised this too. This is an everybody problem. Whether you're a technology person or you're not, we've passed where this is a technology problem. This is everybody's got to get involved. So I do think, some forums, national forums and international forums that really do start thinking about what are the outcomes we want? What are the policies that we need to work together that amplify the technologies we need to have work together to be able to move. forward. We need to have some discussions about technology that frankly simplify some of the technology. And I think we in the tech business have been somewhat guilty of what I like to call the Wizard of Oz progress. Don't look behind the curtain. You don't need to know. It's all powerful. We've done that, and I think Melissa was trying to make that point too. That we've had a kind of a maybe a few people who really were operating that way. It's time to pull those curtains back and do what we can to desimplify. And everybody doesn't need to know everything about what makes the technology work. I don't know. I'm doing this today on a mobile phone. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure, and I'm pretty good about all the reasons and how it works that I can do this today on a mobile phone. But I trust that it can, and I know enough to believe in it. And I think we have to really start focusing on what's enough, how do we educate, and then focus the policy work on the outcomes that we want to get from those policies. And I'm pretty comfortable that technology will be able to adapt to what the outcomes we are. Too many times today, I think we've started with the technology as the outcome and tried to adapt the rest to technology. And one thing COVID has showed us is that you can have best technology in the world. When the world and the forces of nature decide we're going to do something different, right, we're going to be the ones adapting. And I think that's an important lesson learned here.
Really like what you said, Terry, particularly about focusing on outcomes first and then figuring out how we apply technology. I think that will help guide us in 2021 onwards. So as we've been thinking about where data technology is going to take us in 2021 and the choices we need to make sure there are good choices that benefit everyone, it's important to recognize that there is a strong interplay between the public sector and the private sector. To such end, we're excited to have Representative Will Hurd, representative from the 23rd District of Texas, as well as Teresa Carlson, Vice President for the Worldwide Public Sector at AWS, share their views on how these two important efforts, both with the private sector and the public sector, can work together to ensure that the future of space is as beneficial to as many people as possible as we go forward together. Here now, Representative Will Hurd and Teresa Carlson sharing their thoughts.
I think it's something we're already supposed to follow, and that's buy, not build, right? We have, I never would have thought that my time in Congress, I'd be known as the IT procurement guy, but how you change and streamline how the government purchases goods and services is important. And so that principle makes sense when it comes to defending digital infrastructure. It makes sense when it comes to operating in space as well. And as Teresa just went through, look, that's all the things that she mentioned that's happening in a company. I've learned probably more about what's happening in space by touring private sector facilities than doing something with NASA or someplace else. And so part of this is don't get in the way. Don't have an overly burdensome regulatory environment, work together. And again, I think the most important thing is buy, not build. But we should also be figuring out how do we ensure that we're training the folks that are going to be able, that Teresa is going to be able to hire, and people that are going to go work for Blue Origin to go into this domain that we've been operating in for a long time, but we're blossoming. And again, I'm proud. I represent a part of Texas, this little town called Presidio. It's one of the poorest communities in Texas, but they had a rocket club, and they went on to some national competition and beat out some of these prep schools from the East Coast, right? And now they get to go on a bus, a couple of times a year to the Blue Origin facility and literally watch people building rockets that are going into space, right? And so we have to encourage folks that are going into these programs so that we can populate these great companies and also build up a space for us. And so I think that's stay out of the way, but partner, because the only way that we're going to continue, we are in a competition, period, full stop. And the only way that we're going to compete is by not breaking up great American companies. It's by working with great American companies in order to challenge folks like the Chinese. Also helping companies defend their IP. We had the Chinese consulate in Houston shut down, right? What else? What's in Houston that's important? A little old thing called Johnson Space Center, right? And so making sure that we're helping companies defend that intellectual property. We've seen an increase of illegal immigration coming across the border from Chinese nationals. That number has increased multiple fold. And, they came and said, oh, we're a painter, or we're a carpenter. And they were looking for jobs in facilities in South Texas that deal with commercial space. And then when you investigate, guess what? They had a PhD in astrophysics, right? And so this is, our companies are not only being threatened in space, they're being threatened here in intellectual property. So how do we make sure that we're defending and helping the private sector defend against these attacks are important.
It's been 50 years since we landed on the moon. It's kind of unbelievable. And we're still learning from that experience today even. And I actually can't think of a more exciting time for space right now to be working with the government and commercial sector customers on space initiatives. And as Congressman Hurd just mentioned, space is not just about trying to understand what exists beyond Earth, but it's there's so many benefits for space exploration for us here on Earth to understand and learn. And AWS is not new to this market. One of my favorite stories, I started our public sector business in 2010, and NASA JPL was one of our earlier customers. And they actually came to us and said, hey, we need a GovCloud region that's ITAR ready. And we said, okay, we should build that. And so in 2011, we launched the first GovCloud ITAR region so they could process and store and disseminate ITAR classifications of data for space missions, which has been a lot of fun. And since that time, we've done hundreds of workloads working with groups across NASA, Air Force Space Command, NRO, NGA, and others. And I have to admit, for me, it is fun and exciting. It was an area early on that I personally didn't know that much about. And now I've found myself to be such a fan. And if you're anywhere inside of AWS, I'll call it the space geeks. They watch and pay attention to everything, which is kind of cool and super interesting, of course, for us. But not only have we done like work over the last few years, we're also very involved in projects like Artemis. And we also do work with the classified communities on the intel side and defense, which I think is really important to keep our nation safe as well as we learn and understand about our adversaries and how do we, again, what kind of applications and tooling do we need. And with AWS, the other element for us is we're building on behalf of our customers. And we actually heard from our intelligence community customers a few years ago that they wanted and needed a managed ground station capability, because what we hear often is we need speed and agility in this market segment because it moves too slowly. So tools like cloud computing, I think, will help to revolutionize what we can do in space, because you again, if you think about the ability to not own everything, but build out, do experimentation, and then again, pay for only what you use, that's a necessary element of being able to move faster and having that quick experimentation. And David, in 2018, we launched something called the AWS Ground Station, which was kind of our first new service outside of things that our space customers already use. And Ground Station is a fully managed service that lets government commercial customers control satellite communications, process the data, and scale their operations without having to go out again and buy all that. And they can also work across other tools and applications. And then it's fun. We see hundreds of new startups coming out in this arena. I see a lot of venture capitalists now actually funding and looking at how do they take advantage and fund and back new startups in this arena. Groups like Capella, which is a great, Capella Space is a startup that's now running all on AWS. So that's a lot of fun for us to work with these new startups and understand them. And these services, like I said, are really going to be critical for us in the defense and intelligence monitoring and decision making. And I want to thank Congress for actually, because now we have U.S. Space Force, and we're very committed to working with Space Force on their new applications and what they're trying to achieve from a mission, which I think is going to be a lot of fun. And in fact, I was the beneficiary of Space Force because my new leader of my aerospace and satellite business unit that I announced a few weeks ago is going to be headed up by retired General Clint Crozier, who was one of the individuals that helped formulate that whole program. And I kind of stole him only because he retired. So he's now coming, and we're very excited. He's going to start with us August, so just around the corner. And he's going to help us understand how we better serve our customers around these tools that space can provide, like IoT and edge computing. I just had a full day review with my team, and I could have had 3 days because it was so exciting, kind of understanding the applications and capabilities that we've really not even started to scratch the surface on. So again, a lot that we can do here and a lot that we can be doing to even protect our nation even more.
So as folks know, usually with the Geotech Hour, I like to segue to the lightning round. So we are now at the lightning round part. I'm going to go first to Terry, then to Melissa, and then Derry to close. And what I'm looking for are 2 to 3 tweet-length answers as to what technology you're most excited about and enthusiastic about as we look to 2021 onward. So Terry, what would be the things that have you the most excited?
So, David, I don't think it's one technology. I think it's a wedding of what we're very fortunate is maturing technologies today. I mentioned the 5G networks. 5G networks are going to be the base of that, but you've heard Melissa talk about there is we also need to have, affordable and the word I'm looking for here is commoditized AI. Mm-hmm. So everybody has a piece of AI, and I'm going to use the term augmented intelligence, because it starts out with a way that everybody can filter some of the vast amounts of data to make it, a level that I can now make a decision on. This is something that DoD was fighting a long time. We've been overwhelmed with data forever, and we really had to work through this. I think you're seeing that now in industry, and you're seeing it in everyday lives. So you're going to have the 5G networks. You're going to need commoditized augmented intelligence. We're going to need both memory, storage, and processing at the edge because everything's going to move faster. And that's happening today. The great news is everything I'm talking about is doable today if we will start putting it together. The other 2 things I'm really excited about it are drones and robots. Mm-hmm. And the reason that is because what 5G, storage at the edge, the computer processing at the edge bring me is we're going to kill the Internet of Things. It's now the sensor net of things. Should have been the sensor net of things at the beginning. We're going to have sensors that can feed us the data that now the AI will be able to interpret for us, do us some of the analysis to be able to do, better medical treatment. And I think about, and my family has gone through some interesting issues with Alzheimer's. Technology's right there to be able to help both the treatment, the cure, but also help the people that have it live a better life by doing some things technology-wise. There's so many items that if we will look at that, and what I just described, that is the 5G ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And if we will think about how we deliver that so we don't leave people behind, we commoditize, which is going to happen, but we can accelerate that with some policies. And we couple with being given that to, and I loved Melissa's point is, we could have students today that are going to have some extra time to do some things, even if we start remote schools, online. We could be assigning them some interesting projects to do at all levels. We could be pairing them with some interesting experts. There's some great models for that. The Black Data Processing Association does this already with taking industry experts to disadvantaged areas. That be expanding on that would be a wonderful thing to do. We could really unleash this set of technologies that are right there, and do that, I think, in a more structured way that could, it's not a panacea, it's not going to solve every problem, but it really could get us, I think, on a track. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is that if we do all that, we have primed the innovation pump about the best we can, because we're going to see, I know people are worried, and I don't mean to dismiss this worry, because there are a lot of people, because of what's happened to technology, worried about what's my next job.
Right.
If we unleash this technology, we're going to create more jobs than we have people to do them. And that's where we want to be. I mean, that's like we're going to have more work that they can do that not only, I think, will pay them better, but I think, frankly, many people will find that work, when we get it to be more rewarding, because I think because we'll have more jobs, you're going to be able to be more careful about what you're going to do, what you select. And this notion that still lingers, I think, maybe more in America than Europe, that I'm going to start my life as one thing and stay there as one thing,
right,
is going to get to be thrown out the window. How boring would that be? I mean, I'm lucky. I had like 9 careers, so it's been great. I just think that's where we're headed. This is an exciting opportunity. We really have, with COVID, yes, crisis, the world may be, a bit in a negative spot, but there is, to Melissa's point, a really big shining ball out there if we'll get the right people to focus on it and bring everybody along.
I really like what you said, particularly about how can we make sure the sensor net of things and commoditized AI, because like you said, I mean, and linking it to Melissa's other statement about we have creative problem solvers that might be able to help out, as one who actually sort of was pulled into science fairs at 15 and 17, and that led to me doing what I'm doing now. Maybe we need to have the equivalent of that and jumpstart that in 2021.
We should have science fairs, social fairs. I don't know what other fairs.
I'm with you. I would love to help make it happen, Terry. You've got me sold, so I'm convinced. So Melissa, recognize that's a hard act to follow. What has got you excited about 2021? I know you can bring it. And is it quantum clocks? Because I notice your clock's not changing there. So just
that's just there to make you uncomfortable. So I actually feel like we have dismissed the human aspect of sort of the challenges and the solutions when we've talked about technology too often. And so I'm actually quite bullish on the fact that this may bring us into a period where we're much more serious and excited and interested in this sort of socio-technical aspect of research and development. I think we're going to have to really solve some challenges around building culture, positive culture for humans. We are not building a world for efficiency. We are building a world where we as humans can live fulfilling, positive lives. I mean, my goals, my outcomes are not about efficiency. Mm-hmm. They are about living a sort of sustained, fulfilled life in service of my community. And I feel like we've really dismissed the human sciences and the sort of social sciences for a long time. And we have a really interesting opportunity for discovery based around this sort of intersection of technology and the information sciences and the social sciences that I hope we get people excited about. I'm also quite bullish on discovery. People are in a place right now where the conversation is feeling very incremental, which is what happens when people get worried about the economy and worried about jobs and worried about solving the problems that are in front of them. And I am all for that happening. Mm-hmm. But we are not homogenous as people, and we will not all be inspired and brought in by the same types of goals. And someone needs to set a positive vision for the America of the future. Someone needs to set a large vision that all of us can find ourselves in, not just a narrow set of efficient structures and processes and goals and steps, but a vision where I can create my aspect of that positive vision of America. And so I believe that new types of computing like neuromorphic computing and quantum computing and optical computing that fundamentally rewrite the rules of the game for artificial intelligence, that disrupt all the things we think are going to disrupt everything else right now. I think the inspiration that we're having right now around synthetic biology and pushing that into real clinical spaces is so exciting, because the next wave, the things we're going to learn, and the way we're being emboldened to embrace biology as a real science, and use it instead of just talk about it and research it, I think is incredible and opens up whole new opportunities for how we think about materials and how we think about sort of supply chain backups. So I can have an insecure supply chain if I can just turn on another way of doing it when that gets closed down. I can think about resilience in fundamentally new ways. I want to give people space to solve problems that we believe are impossible. I want to give people the vision of their lives that they can be working on a problem they cannot possibly imagine being solvable in this moment. There are groups of people who will shock you, who will rock your world, but because you gave them the room to prove that you were wrong, that we could do more. But I also believe that a lot of people need stability, and they need structure, and they need you to leave them alone and allow that to be enough. And we have to be pathetic. And I think this is the last thing that I really think is, for me, the word that needs to be said to most scientists and most technocrats and most policymakers is empathy really is valuable, and it's needed right now. And we need to meet people where they are instead of trying to grab them by the nape of the neck and drag them to where we are. I really believe that we have to fundamentally rethink how we impose our own visions and values onto others, and how we start to create a vision that has room for all of us.
Well said, and particularly on both empathy and going to people as opposed to having them come to you. I also resonated, Melissa, because when I went to go do my dissertation, I actually said I wanted to improve organizational response to disruption. And schools of engineering said, that's great, but we don't care about the people side. Schools of policy said, that's great, but we don't care about the technology side. It actually ended up in a business school that they cared about it. But like you said, maybe now we're finally realizing it's got to be both the heart and the head making this happen and bringing the technologies together. So thank you for that, Melissa. So Derry, bring it home for us. And what are the things that have got you excited about 2021?
Sure, and I think to say brash that AI is done, we're completed and we're ready to go is not the right statement here. I think we are just at the tip of the iceberg. However, AI for a wonderful technology in a lab is not anything useful whatsoever. Utilizing first, we can use the word AI in the marketing term, and that's fine. But for the practical aspect of it, wherein we're able, what I'm looking forward to doing is seeing how we can leverage the educational aspect and transform the educational aspect of what's happening today, and empowering the new, and the new, I wouldn't say new generation, I would say the new entries into this workforce, as well as the next generation, as to what is that, and give them the art of the possible. Allow them that, as you said, give them the space and give them the art of the possible, and see what we can transform, utilizing technologies that are in there. So for example, the 5G technologies, giving that mobile stuff to the edge, where you can use AR. You need a different way of transforming how you interact with others. So using augmented reality and being able to walk down the street and have a conversation with someone, wearing glasses or whatever device you have on you is great. But I don't prescribe to know the answer to that question. I'm looking forward to see what will become of it by providing that educational platform to allow that growth to take place. And I think the other part to that, as part of my why I got involved, some of these startups is there's the educational aspect, as well as these sensors, if you will, the Internet of Things, moving things into a different space, wherein how that can be useful, not just from I think folks think cameras, folks think drones, and think only of the law enforcement side. And unfortunately, that seems to be the only place they stop. I think there is a massive change in the way how people need to think about both of those aspects and the usefulness of it from a first responder perspective. In the medical community, being able to quickly and accurately deliver needed medical supplies. For example, if someone needs an organ transplant, and quickly getting that organ to where it needs to go, or being able to help the farmers, being able to transform what they're doing through those different devices, and utilizing that data and compute at the edge to provide that information. So let's fast forward to the fact that we've got that internet working at the edge and the compute at the edge, in the Winnebago, if you will. But I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do and what massive transformations we can have to shore up those possible food shortages that and food disruptions that we may have, and allow folks to be able to, I think, as we're all saying here, live their lives and actually enjoy life, not just being bogged down by technology. So allowing the outcome to be based on how do we live a better life along with the technology that we're creating.
Well said, Derry. And I particularly liked how you were linking what Terry was talking about, how we can recognize with 5G and the commoditization once we get AI out of the lab. And as you said, in some cases, we still need to get it out of the lab first. But once we can get it there, and then linking to Melissa, what we can do to empower everybody and see them as creative problem solvers, I look forward to the future in which that AI 5G enabled Winnebago is available for not too expensive price for everybody. So I want to thank Terry, thank Derry, thank Melissa. You all have been astounding panelists. A lot of what you have said, I think, is hopefully needing to be heard by everyone as we think about 2021. I hope they listen. And similarly, if you're open to it, we would love to incorporate your thoughts that you've shared here today with what we're considering with the Geotech Commission, which will have its initial recommendations out in the towards mid-October. Final recommendations in January. You are powerful voices for positive change, and I thank each and one of you for sharing your thoughts with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to thank everyone for listening and joining this great conversation as to digital crossroads, 2021 and beyond. We'll be having more events as part of the Atlantic Council's 2020 series, thinking about the future ahead. So please be sure to check out atlanticcouncils.org elections 2020. That's atlanticcouncil.org/elections 2020. This has been an educational effort to try and be nonpartisan about the future we need to think about, and hope you'll join us as we continue these conversations as we go forward, thinking about the world and how we can make sure data and tech benefit us all. I'd also like to give thanks to everyone who made this video possible and this conversation. That includes Roger Morales, Lauren Hollins, Stewart Scott, Gina Wood, and many more at the Atlantic Council. And again, big thank you to all our panelists and all of you, the public, for supporting the work we do to have these conversations. I'll see you next time.